If you work with humans, which is just about everybody listening to this podcast, then this episode is for you. Valerie Bogie joins me to talk about all of the difficult circumstances we can face when the animals we care about often require us to also be skillful, empathetic, and compassionate with their caretakers. From active listening to building resiliency to avoiding burnout and compassion fatigue, we dive deep into the human side of the work we do in this episode. Valerie's experience in the animal world made her realize the need for more emotional understanding and support for the human side of the human-animal bond. Since 2000, she has worked in a variety of settings, which include the vet hospital, animal shelter, veterinary behavior practice, dog training, and caring for exotic animals at several zoos and aquariums across the country. Once she learned about veterinary social work, she realized it was what had been missing from her animal care experiences. Valerie is currently working on her Master's of Science in Social Work degree with a veterinary social work specialty at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Valerie works for Insight Animal Behavior Services and GRAZE, which is Growing Resiliency for Aquarium and Zoo Employees. Focusing on human support services, she leads a variety of workshops, including emotional CPR, which focuses on connecting and active listening to support someone going through a difficult time. And if you are enjoying the Bitey Into the Dog, you can support the podcast by going to aggressivedog.com, where there's a variety of resources to learn more about helping dogs with aggression issues, including the upcoming Aggression in Dogs Conference happening from October 11th to 13th, 2024 in Scottsdale, Arizona, with both in-person and online options. You can learn more about the Aggression in Dogs Master Course, which is the most comprehensive course available anywhere in the world for learning how to work with and help dogs with aggression issues. I also have a wide variety of webinars, upcoming courses, videos, and articles, all from the foremost experts in training and behavior. We are your one-stop shop for all things related to aggression in dogs. Hey guys, welcome back to the Bitey Into the Dog. This is a very special episode because we are talking about the human side of the work we do. And I'm very excited to be diving into this topic because it's not talked about enough in our industry. And I have an expert on that topic here. Valerie Bogie is here joining us, and we're going to take a deep dive into all things human and the behavior work we do. So welcome to the show, Valerie.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start first, kind of getting a little bit more about your background. What got you into this? Because you've done a lot of work with animals and now you're also helping the humans. So what kind of, motivated you to get into that role?
Yeah, so I have played a role in many animal arenas. So I have, currently behavior consultant for Insight Animal Behavior Services. I have been a zookeeper for over 16 years. I've worked in animal shelters. I worked in an animal hospital. So I'm currently pet sitting right now. So, a lot of different spaces. And I got burned out. I loved the animals. I loved training the animals. I loved so much about working in the zoo and aquarium field, but I just felt overwhelmed. I felt I was in a situation where I was being bullied and wasn't really being heard or seen by management. And at some point, you have to make that decision. And I felt like I had a really great run of my career around, being in multiple facilities and working with amazing animals and, working all the weekends, working early, working late, missing holidays with your family, that all takes a toll on you as well. And so if there is additional challenges, just personnel wise, that just makes it almost unbearable some days. So I made the decision to leave that industry in 2021 and then started working with Insight and, kind of started poking around looking for my next big thing. I was thinking about, do I want to be a life coach? Do I want to be a counselor? Do I want to do something with humans? Because behavior is behavior. We're mammals and there's just so many similarities, and I just find it fascinating. So many of the parallels that are there, just our animals can't talk to us. And so I wanted to kind of use some of those skills in a new way, and then came across the veterinary human support certificate through University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So that is under the umbrella of the veterinary social work program. But this certificate was specifically designed for people in the animal world who want to people better. So that program really hits, kind of the 4 different areas of veterinary social work, and really was the introduction to veterinary social work for me. And I was hooked. So, I completed that certificate in a year. I think you can have up to like 4 or 5 to finish it. And I was like, just, off to the races with everything, and then decided to pursue the master's because I just realized learning about veterinary social work, some of the terms and just everything that I was learning, I just had that aha moment. Like, if I would have had this type of support in my career, maybe I'd still be there, but I didn't. And now I'm trying to be that person for others so that, they can make those decisions for themselves, but also learn how to take care of themselves a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of us that get into working with animals usually leave a field where we're sick of the people. And it's kind of the opposite here. You went from, I'm working, because, when you're in marine mammals and zoos, yes, you're working with people, but, at a much lesser degree than if we're doing behavior consulting, going to people's homes, right? A lot of days are, yes, you're working with your coworkers, but you're working with the animals. And then you go from that environment to, okay, now I just want to work with the people a lot more, which is an interesting thing. So what's motivated you in that regard? Is it like, I want to fix people because I'm tired of them? Or it's like, I want a better understanding of how to navigate conversation? Like, what kind of drove you to that?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway, and actually that's one of my pet peeves, is when people say, oh, I work with animals because I don't like people, because that immediately puts others on the defensive, because you're always caring for animals on a team. I'm not going to go to work 7 days a week to take care of every single animal. That's not realistic. You have to be part of a team. You have to communicate. And so I think that is part of the detriment, where people think they're entering into this animal world and it's just you and the animals. And that's never the case, right? Like you said, like for a consultant that's going into people's homes or meeting, multiple meetings on training sessions on Zoom. Yes, you have coworkers and supervisors, just like any other job when you're working at a zoo. And then you have to do public presentations, and you have to do, like you have all these other hats that you have to wear. So I think it really was just having that lived experience and recognizing it didn't matter what state I was living in, what facility I was working at, what my job title was, that there was still these underlying themes that I was noticing, and no one was really talking about it.
Interesting. It's kind of like how I started with aggression, because you saw a need to fill a space where there wasn't a lot of information. So, well, thank you for filling that space now, because let's face it, there's not a lot of talk about this, especially in the dog training community. And so let's kind of just define the role of veterinary social worker, because I think when people hear the term social worker, it's almost like when people hear the term like dog trainer, it could be a lot of different things. There's lots of layers, lots of different roles. So talk us through that for anybody that's maybe not familiar with the term veterinary social worker or even social worker.
Yeah. So quiz question. What do you think a social worker does?
Yeah. So for me, when I hear the term social worker, you're thinking somebody that's just been reported to the authorities, right? And you're like, okay, now you got this role. And maybe sometimes you're helping people that, need therapy, but there's not a lot of definitive answers for me when I hear that term. Now I know because I've met you, but initially I had no idea. So, I'm glad I'm getting educated on exactly all these different roles. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So, and that is a perfect example. I feel like your answer is on par with pretty much most of the people that I've talked to. So kind of defining social work first, and I can even back up to why I chose social work over some of the other mental health professional titles. I chose social work because really it is a profession that is looking to help individuals, families, but then also communities, and really identifying problems in systems and working towards policy change. And there's also a code of ethics. So when you become a social worker, you are bound by a code of ethics. Like, that's huge, right? And so you kind of have a cheat sheet of, oh, this is a challenging situation. I can go back to something. And you just know that everyone's playing by the same rules and has had the same education. So to me, social work just has a broader lens. And they actually call that, micro is where you're doing more of the one-on-one clinical therapy. like a therapist, counselor. And then there's the meso, which might be more of like the group work or community work. And then there's also the macro. And that's really the people that are working towards policy change and, campaigning and things like that. So there's so many different layers to it. So I liked that flexibility where I didn't have to be put in a box of, you can only do one-on-one counseling. No, I can do so much more with that. So that's why I really liked social work in general. And then veterinary social work is focusing on the human needs anywhere that there's a human-animal bond. So pretty much anyone with an animal in their life, anyone listening to this podcast right now could benefit from veterinary social work. So as the name implies, it was originally designed to focus on the needs of veterinarians in clinics and then also the clients in clinics, right? If you're getting hard news about your animal or you're saying goodbye to your animal, it's nice to have a liaison or someone that is trained a little bit more in depth about the emotional aspect of some of those decisions that you're making, but then also being there for the staff who have to do those hard things every single day. And veterinary social work has kind of 4 different quadrants, we call them. It was actually started in 2002 at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, by Dr. Elizabeth Strand. So those 4 main components, one of them is intentional well-being. That was actually renamed. So it used to be called compassion, fatigue, and conflict management, which is something I know we want to dive into today. But
interesting.
As you've said before, words matter. And so this was an intentional change to call it intentional well-being, right? Because then that kind of shifts that focus into being more proactive than just constantly reactive, right? So
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
the first one.
Second one, grief and bereavement. And that one I think is so interesting because obviously culturally we all process grief just on the human side of the, human grief. If you lose a person in your life differently. And then what does that look like when it's a pet, right? There's still a lot of things going on there. And then what if it's your animal at the zoo? You don't own that animal. It's not your pet, but it's not your coworker. It's not your friend, right? So there's a lot of gray areas. So one of the terms I learned when kind of taking that deeper dive is disenfranchised grief. And that was another aha moment for me. So disenfranchised grief is grief that is not really acknowledged by the general population or public. So we could put pet death in there, right? Because some people are, it's just a pet. Like, are you kidding? Like, I spend more time with that pet than most of the humans in my life, right? But it's the same thing with the animals at the zoo. Or, what if we lose a smaller animal that isn't publicized on social media for that facility? And then how does that make you feel? And so there's just so many layers because there's different types of grief. I could talk about that in for another hour. The third one is animal assisted interventions. I think that's a pretty common one when people think veterinary social work. Oh, you are a therapist and you have a dog that people can pet while they're coming to therapy, right? Which is great. And not just dogs, right? There's equine therapy where people can go to learn about horses, take care of horses as part of their therapy. And then that fourth one is the link between human and animal violence. And so that one's really looking at the statistics of if there is animal abuse, a lot of times there's human abuse in that household and vice versa. So really looking at, community level initiatives of how are we tracking this? How are these entities communicating so we can track this better and help everyone in the household? Domestic violence shelters, some are now offering that you could bring your pet with you, and that wasn't always the case. Or there's networks where someone can secretly foster your animal for you so you can get to safety. And just there's just 4, but each one is got a lot of depth to it, which also I think is very attractive when you're talking about veterinary social work, to just know a little bit more about those quadrants.
Yeah, that's really helpful to understand the different, areas that you might go into. And, the question I was going to ask you is, it's so new to the field. It seems like there's not a lot of veterinary social workers, I'm assuming, out there. Is there a number that you're aware of? Or is this, in my search, actually, when I was looking for guests on this topic, and I've been searching for years, only a few names come up to me. So what is your feedback on that?
Yeah, so it is still kind of niche and growing. And it's amazing, for something that was started in 2002. I recently, earlier in the year, went to the WVC conference in Vegas and was talking to people about veterinary social work. People didn't understand what it was or had never heard of it before. So I'm like, oh, wow, that's a good indication. We still have a lot of work to do, right? But as far as numbers, I don't know off the top of my head, because there are more programs now. So it's not just University of Tennessee anymore. There are other colleges that have veterinary social work as an option, which is amazing. And also, too, for someone that is already a social worker and then finds veterinary social work and is like, wow, this is it. I want to do this. There's actually now post-grad certificates. So you can add that additional education on, even if you're already, completed your school for social work. But there's not a lot of them. And that's also trying to spread the word, because you might be listening to this and think, oh, wow, that veterinary human support certificate sounds pretty interesting. You can take the full certificate. You can get the modules individually. So, just kind of taking that little steps towards educating people, getting people the awareness of what it is, because then it's just going to spread, right? And we're going to get more people. But it can be difficult, doing a search. There's some states that have a few and things like that. So we're really working on getting more. But it's definitely an area of need if anyone wants to join me.
Yeah, I'm sure the listeners hearing everything you're saying is probably like, we do need to see these spaces filled, because everything you're talking about in those 4 quadrants, so to speak, there's absolutely a demand for all of those services and all of those topics. It's just so badly needed. So thank you for the work you're doing. Okay, let's dive into the challenges now. Let's talk about, some of the challenges that happen in our work. Let's kind of focus maybe for a moment on what trainers and consultants are going into these behavior cases. And you've had experience with that too in the work you've done. So let's think aggression cases, some of the more difficult, challenging behavior cases. What are some common things? And you can even dive into all those 4 quadrants if you want, but what are some of the most common challenges you're seeing and that you hear about and that people are coming to you for?
I think one of the hardest things is that the client is dealing with trigger stacking, probably just like their dog is. So the capacity that they have to absorb information and then retain and then do it on their own is very small. So something that we use at Insight is actually the Zaret burden interview. So it's a caregiver burden scoring. So originally it was created to measure the caregiver burden of humans taking care of other humans, right? Because we already know that that is really tough. If, you're the primary caretaker for someone, whether they have a disability or they have a chronic illness, whatever that looks like, that is hard. That is really hard. So they have scientifically been able to alter that, change the word to pet, took out a couple questions that didn't make as much sense for the pet realm of things. And then we put that in our new patient behavior questionnaire. So every single client, before I meet them, I'm reading over their questionnaire before we have our hour-long, intake assessment. And you can almost quantify their stress level based on that number.
Wow.
So it's huge because it just gives you at least some frame of reference, right? As far as, are they thinking about, then we ask a couple follow-up questions at the end, like, have you considered rehoming? Have you considered euthanasia? Right. And so we at least kind of know where they're at because we want to meet them there. That's exactly the point, right? So we're not saying, oh, you're just a number. And, obviously there's so much more that goes into it, but just having some data point to say, okay, here's where we're starting. Like when you are walking in the door and we are, having our first interactions, where are you? Because the goal, similar with working with the dog, we want to decrease those stress levels, right? So we've actually started sending that caregiver burden scoring in some follow-up emails as well. So like the 3-month, the 6-month mark. So we're going to have some really cool data, hopefully, to say like, okay, after this many months of treatment, or looking into the correlations between the number, so the caregiver burden score versus the diagnosis for the dog, right? Because we know, like you
Yeah.
said, aggression is tough. Separation anxiety is just as tough because, a lot of times you can't leave your house. So you're isolated.
Right.
If you have aggressive dog, you're isolated. You're not meeting other people. You can't talk to someone at, we're not going to dog parks. We're not stopping and talking to people on walks. Like that is not part of just that daily life. Or maybe I can't have people over to my house, right? So there's a lot of different ways, but, just having kind of that starting block because the scoring goes up into the 70s, but pretty much anything over 17 is considered a significant burden. So if I'm meeting with someone and they're in like the 50s, that's pretty high. So I already know that I am going to adjust how much homework I'm giving them. I'm going to slow things down. I'm going to make sure I'm giving them space to talk and share things versus someone who is, maybe at a 20. Obviously there's other parts that go into it, like what's their training background, like how much work have they done already and things like that. But just being mindful of how stressed out they are, because just like we can't train a dog that is over threshold, a new trick at that moment, we can't train a human that is over threshold something new either. So I think that is something that can benefit anyone that is working with pet owners to start to think about things in that lens.
Is that something that somebody needs training on how to use properly? Or is it something that somebody can learn, you get the form, and they see the questions, and then the score will give them at least a baseline of where to go? Now, obviously, the social work part would require the training, or, if we start to get into the human therapy part of things. But as far as a baseline of seeing where our client's at, is that something a trainer can use just without any training, necessarily formal training, I should say?
Yeah. It's available, and I can share the scientific studies like in the show notes. We just have it as like a PDF, and it's basically like a 0 through 4. So there's you can choose never, sometimes always, whatever the ratings are for that. So that I think is something that anyone can use. The nice thing about it as well is if the client doesn't have a safe space to share some of this information, sometimes reading those questions is really helpful for them because sometimes we just minimize things like, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And then you start reading some of these questions like, are you afraid of what's to come? Or, just some of these questions that they're filling out before, they meet with us. I think that can also be a really helpful exercise for the clients just to kind of be in that headspace of like, oh, wow, this is worse than I was really perceiving, or, I haven't been really fully grasping, the depth of this issue or how it really is affecting me. So I think it can be helpful for both ends. And you don't need any training to be able to utilize that scoring. So in a perfect world, everyone would have that. So then you'd be able to you're collecting data on the pet, but you're collecting data on the human as well. And how helpful is that, right?
Yeah, it's a spectacular tool because it's something I, tell my students all the time. You really need to understand the human side. And how do we get that information? Typically, we're doing it in person. We're reading the person's facial expressions, their body language. We're hearing their story. But I love that there's this tool that can get some of that information ahead of time. Because let's face it, we do it for the dogs all the time. Where does your dog sleep? All those questions we would typically have on our intake forms, whether we do it in person or we send it out ahead of time. We don't do that for the humans. And if we do, it's very minimal. It's so minimal. So, and I would agree. I think the burden of the caregiver or these pet guardians that are in these challenging cases is probably the most significant issue I see as well. And I would argue that separation anxiety cases often have more of a burden because of the limitations, the extreme limitations on not leaving the dog alone versus, aggression case. If it's like a stranger danger case, you just have to worry about when strangers come over versus such a significant impact on their lifestyle. Okay. So we talked about burden. What some other common challenges you would say are top of the list for these behavior cases from the client side?
From the client side, I think they're probably dealing with, the burnout and the compassion fatigue as well, right? Like, so the caregiver burden is huge, but then also I feel like when people get to us, as a veterinary behaviorist practice, they have tried so much, and we could talk about this again forever, but just the gray areas of the dog training industry, right? So someone has said that they are a behaviorist or they do a board and train, or they do, so they're doing all these things. They're spending all this money and time and energy spending and just hoping that it's going to work, but just not always having the guidance or education to understand why some of those might not be as fruitful as others. So I think a lot of times too, they are just tired. I'm sure you've seen it in plenty of your cases where they're just like, you're my last hope. This is it. If you can't fix this, but then what kind of pressure does that put on your dog trainer when you tell them, or your veterinary health professional, you're my last hope? Gosh, then now we are transferring that burden over to that professional that you're seeking help for. And I think that also, there's burden transfer scoring surveys that are for veterinarians. I haven't seen one yet for dog trainers, but I imagine it could probably be tweaked. But there's surveys for that too. So you could kind of collect data on yourself to say, okay, well, how much is all of this that I am intaking on a constant daily basis really affecting me? So
yeah, it's, clients are going to be exasperated and sometimes embarrassed too about their dog's behavior, or they're blaming themselves. They're thinking, oh, this is my fault, or I'm not doing this, or I'm not being, quote, alpha enough. And they have all this different noise coming in from different angles. So, and I definitely want to jump into the trainer side, but as trainers and consultants, what are some things we can do to help clients that are feeling this incredible burden, this exasperation, this embarrassment, all these emotions that can come into these cases? What can we do as trainers if we're not necessarily social workers, but let's talk through some of the tools that you use.
So I am an educator for emotional CPR. And so that was actually part of the veterinary human support certificate. And the whole basis of emotional CPR is training peers, so just regular human, not a practitioner or an expert or clinician, how to help other people better. And so it really is a course in active listening, because if active listening was not modeled for you when you grew up, you do not have that skill. But luckily, you can build that skill, right? So it's something you can definitely work on if you are aware of that gap. When someone is hiring you and paying you for your expertise and help, it makes it very easy to kind of come in and like steamroll someone, right? Because you're like, oh, I have your bullet points you want to get through. You have all these concepts, you have these techniques, you have all this information that you basically kind of want to like word vomit at them, because you want to make sure that that client is seeing the value in you as a professional. So sometimes I think we confuse that quantity over quality. So I think some of the best ways that we can support clients is to listen and actually be quiet. And that's something anyone can do. And like you said, it's reading the body language of that person. It's asking them questions and giving them that invitation to share. And something that is really hard to get over at first when you're working on active listening is the silence. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people where they'll just start talking just to fill space, where it gets to be a little bit uncomfortable because you're like, ooh, no one's saying anything. A lot of times that space is giving our brains time to process. And then that person might keep going with that story and give you more details that you might have not known either about them and their capacity to do what steps you're giving them, or something, helpful to learn about that pet. So, there's a lot of benefits to that active listening. And also too, that's just one of the best ways to build rapport with someone too, right? Because a lot of times in human conversation, how's your day? Oh, it was good. How was yours? We just kind of have this even exchange and we're kind of just doing a little back and forth. And so it's really taking the time to say, I am here for you. Yes, I'm here to help you with your dog, but I'm here for you, because the success of that dog and whatever training plan you create is solely on that owner, right? Because they're the one day in, day out have to do all of the things. So giving them the space to share everything that they want to share and kind of process all of that, you can kind of, start to see them relax, start to see them be a little bit more calm. Now you've gotten some trust and they're hopefully in a better headspace now that they feel heard by you to actually be able to learn some of the things you're trying to train them. And then I think the other side of that too is, again, just being very aware of the client in front of you. I think it's really easy to say, oh, okay, this is resource guarding. So here's my top 5 tips for resource guarding, and and we just send things over. That client might only be able to do 2. So if you send them 5 and they only do 2, in the 2 weeks between your sessions, that's not a really great percentage of success rate, right? And then how is that client going to feel about themselves? They're going to feel like they failed you, they failed their dog, instead of let's pare things down. Like, I'm very much in like the less is more camp, where we don't have to give all of the information in our head away in like any one session, right? And so let's give you 2 goals. And then guess what? If they do those 2, that is 100% success rate. Now we have a basis to say, oh, okay, that went really well. Are you ready you want an extra one? Right. And you were working alongside them versus this, like, I am the expert. I am giving you these tools. Like, you must do all of this. Right. I think just really making it manageable for that human. And then also understanding we all have different learning styles. Right. And thinking about how are you giving your information? How many pages is your report? Do you have a million things that they click off of and then they get lost down a rabbit hole and can't get back to the report? Like, thinking about all of those things with that client in mind, I think is really going to help you as a animal professional really connect better with your clients.
Yeah, all really important tools to use. And we talk about empathy all the time on the show, right? And listening and the active listening you were just talking about. Can we role play a little bit here? Because I want to give the listeners an example, because I think this is such a common thing, like from a client. And I also want to impart the need to really empathize with a client that might be saying, like, I'll say some things and that might make people laugh, but it's actually what we might hear all the time. And as trainers and consultants, we have to also be careful not to, make a certain facial expression or grimace when that happens. So we also have to empathize with that. So let's see what your response would be. So you're right now in the role of active listening. I'm like, Valerie, so I've got this dog, and Uncle Bob came over, and the dog bit Uncle Bob, and I don't think it was that bad, although Uncle Bob had to go to the hospital. So I think it's just because I wasn't being alpha enough. Do you think I need to be more dominant? Or maybe it's because it's not just like my last dog. My German Shepherd was kind of like that. And, I think you're my last hope. So I'm just going to give up on this dog. So what should I do? So you get all this, you can kind of picture that. And then, so you're like the dog whisperer, huh? And like, you get all these interesting comments. You want to interject 500 times during that kind of statement. But you're sitting there and you're looking at me with a nice smile and actively listening. But now what would your response be at that moment? Like, what do you address first? Where do you go? How do you empathize with a statement like that?
Wait, so your dog bit your uncle?
Yes.
That sounds really scary. How are you doing?
It was kind of scary. It's, I care about Uncle Bob, and, we like for him to come over, but he was pretty upset about it. And I was upset at my dog too. I don't think he should be the alpha. I should be the alpha and say hello to Uncle Bob.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just saying, he got bit and he had to go to the hospital. Like, my heart just sank, because that's never an easy situation. You love, like you said, you love both individuals there. So I just feel that just makes me want to take a deep breath when you're telling me that story. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're good. Those pauses there. The pauses are gold there. So love that. That's really interesting. That concept that you were just saying, like, take a pause, just listen. And you guys listening in right now can't see Valerie's face, but she's got a really inviting, just I'm listening to you kind of look on her face, which is practiced, and it's coming off naturally, but it's something we do have to practice, something I've had to practice for many years. So yeah, but see, that's the stuff I'm talking about. It's like, that's the things we can face, but we also have to understand that that's what that client is experiencing. That's what that guardian is experiencing. And they might have a lot of misconceptions, but if we jump in and try to change their mind or fix something right at that moment, we're going to lose them. So excellent.
I am a self-proclaimed fixer. So that is why I held on to emotional CPR so much in the active listening, because I realized I wasn't really listening, because You could do that same exact scenario where someone's giving you all this information and, you're kind of going down this rabbit hole of what you're going to do next. So instead of me listening and being present with you, I'm coming up with the 5 ways that I would fix all of your problems. And in that, my brain is focused on that, and I'm not focused on you and what you are sharing. So, it's really resonating with that person. And, also too, in our distraction world, right? We got our watches that buzz and our phones. And, especially if you're like out, seeing clients all day, like people could be texting, calling, all of these things. But really, put the notebook down, close the laptop, just be 2 humans that are trying to help this family and this dog, and start from there. Yeah. And yes, it very much has been a process to learn because you're taught to triage, right? You're like, okay, well, let's see, bites. Okay, we got to work on muzzle training, or maybe we don't have Uncle Bob over anymore, right? And you're just like, whoa, right? You can create a lot of training plans just based on that very short snippet of information, but that's never the full story. So really just giving those pauses, because I think if you're giving those pauses, if your client's an auditory processor, where they kind of need to talk through, right? And they need to think about all of those things, it's very helpful for them to have somebody, because also too, guess what? They're probably embarrassed about that. So they haven't told their friends and family that their dog bit their uncle, right? So you might be one of the only people that they're telling this very tough information. So to have a safe space is huge.
Huge. It's such a wise investment. That pause and that listening is a wise investment, is that trust and relationship account that we're building with that client. So I would love to talk more about the trainer side here, but we're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Hey friends, it's me again, and I hope you are enjoying this episode. Don't forget to join me for the 5th annual Aggression in Dogs Conference, either in person or online from Scottsdale, Arizona, from October 11th to 13th, 2024. This year's lineup includes many incredible speakers, including Dr. Clive Wynn, Dr. Jessica Heckman, Emma Parsons, Sarah Colnice, Dr. Kelly Moffitt, Dr. Amy Cook, and many more. Head on over to aggressivedog.com and click on the conference tab to learn more about the exciting agenda on everything from advanced concepts in dog body language to working with aggression in shelter environments to genetic influences on behavior. Dr. Amy Cook will be bringing her entertaining and energetic personality to the grand reception and cocktail party, which, by the way, will be live streamed as well as in person. And as usual, you'll find a wonderful, kind, caring, and supportive community at the conference, both in person and online. We also have some awesome conference swag for you to check out. This year's slogans that we have on all the sweatshirts, t-shirts, hats, and more are Celebrating Dogs Who Growl, and new for this year, Muzzle Up Buttercup, which I really love. Wolf Culture, the leading brand in promoting humane, positive training methods through captivating graphic designs, is back at it again with this year's one-of-a-kind, limited release conference merchandise. Whether you're a professional trainer, dog enthusiast, or anyone passionate about building better relationships with your pets, Wolf Culture has something for everyone. For a limited time, from August 2nd to October 25th, 2024, shop the official Aggression in Dogs Conference merchandise directly through wolfculture.com. Plus, as a special treat for our listeners, you can enjoy 15% off your purchase with the promo code Bitey, that's B-I-T-E-Y. Again, that's Bitey, B-I-T-E-Y. Use that at checkout or use the link in the show notes. This exclusive discount is a one-time offer per customer and cannot be combined with other discount codes. You can help support the podcast and conference with your purchase of conference swag and at the same time promote positive reinforcement training. All right, we're back here with Valerie Bogie, and we've been talking about the human side of behavior cases and just the human side in general. I think this is a great episode, not only on behavior consulting in dogs, but I think we can get some really great life lessons here, such as active listening, which we were just talking about. But let's maybe shift gears. We have a lot of trainers and consultants that listen to the show, and we were talking about some of the tools they can use, but what are some of the common challenges when you're talking to trainers and consultants? Is it maybe toxic relationships with the clients? Is it they're not participating in the program, which is probably the most common one, right? So what do you see in your common challenges that trainers and consultants can face?
Yes, all of that. Yes, so the compliance, that's huge. And because I think we need to enter these spaces with positive intent to think that, okay, well, if someone is paying me to come over and guide them and teach them and come up with these plans and educate them, you have to assume positive intent that they want to carry out those plans and do those steps. So then as the trainer, you need to figure out why. And then also too, how do you word that? Well, why didn't you do your homework? Okay, that just put them on the defensive and they're going to shut down and probably not share with you. Instead of, how can I help you succeed with this training plan? Is there a gap in what I taught you? Did I give you too much? Is this too complex? And I think a lot of those conversations, oh, well, this doesn't make sense to have the sanctuary or safe space for my dog in this place because of this and this window. And like there's so many little things that are so client and patient specific or dog specific that if we kind of go into it thinking like, oh, well, they're just wasting their money. They're not even doing any of their homework. They're paying you because they want your help, because they trust you. So now it's your job, just as if a dog is failing with something that you're trying to do, you're going to reevaluate. You're going to look at the environment. What else is going on here? Right? Like what other antecedents are going on? Like, is there something else reinforcing this behavior or not reinforcing this behavior in this scenario? So using all of your dog skills on the human, I think is really important because that's going to help you. Because to us, we got to fix this, help with this dog. And that is what we're coming in for. Well, guess what? If they have kids, if they have a job, if they have a family, like they have life outside of that dog. And so really understanding them and building that relationship from the get-go is going to help you. So then we can adjust those expectations, right? Because no one's perfect. The dog's not perfect. Client isn't. And I know I am not perfect, right? Like, and that's part of learning, and if you are not ready to fail, then you're not going to succeed at learning because it's part of the process. So I think in those times where it's like really easy to start doing the blame game, taking it down a notch and then kind of figuring out like, let's use those same behavior sleuthing skills that you use to help identify challenges with that pet for this human.
What do you do for the clients or when a trainer is really struggling, sort of building a relationship with the client? Maybe there's just this wall up or the personalities are clashing and they're really struggling. Or maybe the client's just a toxic person or, we can talk about toxic people just in general. So maybe it's not even a client. We can talk about just what do we do with toxic relationships if it's a client or a friend or whatever. How do you kind of help trainers and consultants with that issue?
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think in any helping profession, you will sacrifice yourself to help. And it doesn't have to be that way because, again, we have to assume positive intent. Everyone has a bad day. But when you start noticing patterns in behavior with that human, you can make a judgment call and decide, is that a relationship you want to continue? And you have that power. I think it's really difficult because there's so many amazing dog trainers out there and you are working in a silo. You started your own business, you got all, you did the certifications, you're killing it, but you're by yourself. So you don't have a sounding board or your sounding board is, significant others or family and friends, but you don't really have a colleague or a coworker in some situations. Or if you do, it might just be a very small team. So I think going with your gut in a lot of these situations, because I think people, oh, well, it'll get better. They just had a bad day, but you are a behaviorist. If you're a dog trainer, you know behavior. And so you can also recognize patterns in human behavior and being able to set those boundaries. If you continue to speak to me this way during our training sessions, I will no longer be able to be your dog trainer, right? You're setting very clear expectations. And if they can't meet that expectation, then that is on them and that is not on you. And I think it's so easy to say like, I can help the dog and I'll muscle through, but at what cost? It's not fair to you.
I have a follow-up to that. What if you're a person like me, or like how I used to be, a big-time introvert, people-pleasing kind of person, and you would never even fathom having those words come out of your mouth? If you continue to speak to me, it would have been never. I could say that now, but it took practice and time in developing, the confidence to say something like that. What are your recommendations or suggestions to kind of build up to that?
Yeah.
Being able to confidently say, hey, listen, if you keep speaking to me like that way, or do you know how to navigate that?
So I think a great place to start is review your onboarding paperwork, because you can put things in your contract. So when someone is coming to you for assistance, you can put something in there that is basically a bullet point or something you can fall back to, right? Because they're signing, e-signing, whatever, that cancellation policy, right? Rescheduling policy. So you have like all of your kind of norms and conditions in a client contract, but you can put something about, we are entering into a mutual relationship, and whatever you want to put in there to say like trust and respect are paramount for your pet's success. If at any point this is not being met, this relationship can be ended by either party. There's a difference between, toxic relationship, but then also maybe you're just not a love match with that trainer, and there's just times where it's just like the learning style and your teaching style just don't match, or just, maybe personality wise. And it's okay to call it out and just say, hey, I'm having a real hard time. Can you tell me a little bit more about X? And just trying to open up those conversations, because they might be feeling the same exact way, but now they're like, oh, well, I signed up for a 6-pack, so we got to trudge through this. So recognizing that you cannot help everybody, and there might be another professional out there that is a better match for that person. So I think also kind of thinking from that, bigger community picture of, if the goal is to help this family and this pet, it doesn't always have to be you, like, I don't know how busy your schedule is. You probably can't help all the animals in your community anyways, right? So being able to be confident enough to say, because I think that person is going to respect the heck out of you if you can have that conversation with them and be like, listen, we've both been trying really hard. Do you want to continue? Is this beneficial? Are you learning, right? Or what if a family member just died? It might not be about you at all either, right? Like there's just so much that goes into that. So I think safeguarding yourself from the front end with something in the client contract or your onboarding paperwork somewhere where they read it at that moment or not, they're signing their name to it. So they should, but then that's something, if you don't feel comfortable having that in-person conversation, if you're going home and you're typing up your report and you're like, oh my gosh, or you see them on your schedule next week and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. Go back to your client contract and send them an email and just say, hey, based on, our last interaction, I feel like we're not really meeting this. You agreed to this, and give them an out, right? And kind of go from there. So I think obviously in person's always better, but if you're building up to that and you're building your own confidence in those conversations, sending the email first and then maybe the invitation for a quick phone call or something, right? Because then both of you have time to read and process, and then can maybe convene that way versus kind of on the fly where you're like, I'm not prepared, right? Like, I don't know what to say. So that I think could be a helpful tool.
I think an additional helpful tool is if there was a template for this, because I think the wording is the most difficult part, because at the same time, you don't want to end up with a negative Google review, right? Somebody taking it personally and be like, I don't like how they talked to me and they just left me and they fired me or whatever. And next thing you know, you're waking up to a bad Facebook review or somebody commenting publicly about you, and where a well-worded communication can actually avoid that many times. So just thinking out loud here, now we're going to have Valerie writing up templates for us.
Yeah, sure.
How to fire, I'm using air quotes there, how to fire, but how to, sever a relationship with a client that's just not working out. Okay. So on the topic of toxic relationships, obviously we have social media now, and that's a significant part of our work that is sometimes necessary, not always necessary. There's arguments that we don't necessarily need social media, but for people that I'm working with, so I'm working with trainers that are sort of, looking to get out there and become speakers or teach courses to other trainers. They kind of need social media because it's going to build brand awareness and exposure. And so let's talk to that crowd, but also even somebody just like they're using social media to get more clients, so that it's kind of a necessary evil, so to speak. Because the answer often is just don't go on social media, but you're at the same time, like that's like saying to somebody, don't use the yellow pages or don't put an ad in the newspaper 20 years ago, right? Or don't take out a radio ad. You're going to miss the advertising opportunities. And let's face it, social media is a lot like that. And so let's say somebody they have to be in there, but we have so much vitriol right now, and it's been ongoing, as we know. But even in the last week, as we're recording this, we've seen this huge backlash against a company that hosted an aversive trainer in their conference, and this particular company really got called out for it. And some people were gracious with how they called out, but there's, of course, when these sort of large groups come together, or like I should say, there's a huge response, you're going to get a lot of really negative comments, to the point of which actually I've seen some illegal things, slander, libel, death threats. I mean, really awful stuff to like poor people that working at that company, that like, wait a minute, I had nothing to do with this. I'm just a worker here, and you're threatening my life. That's this kind of stuff that is just awful that's happening. So my question for you, the big broad question is, what are your suggestions for us for self-preservation, for, let's say we still have to use social media, but we have to learn how to navigate these conversations, these comments, these things that can happen in these backlash moments, or even in more of a microcosm where it's just maybe one comment and you have like just a few people following you, all the way up to if you have 1 million followers and you have thousands of comments. What is your advice there?
Necessary evil is a great way to talk about social media, because there's a lot of great things about it. We can stay in connection with people. We can learn new things. We can see, adorable mini cow videos, like whatever your thing is. There's a lot out there, but I also feel like we just have those kind of armchair critics, right? Where people are very secure in what they are typing from behind a screen, which they would never, if you were face to face with someone, you would never say that to them face to face. So it kind of gives this facade of, I'm going to tell you what I really feel, when, if you were really talking to that human in conversation, you would never say those things. So I think that is kind of one of the tough parts about social media, and it's always there in your face, right? Like you have your phone, like, yeah, if you're trying to build your business, you probably have your notifications turned on so that you can reply immediately when someone likes or makes a comment and things like that. So you're trying to be really engaging, but that is also what is going to zap all of your energy too. So I think as far as social media, you need to kind of pick your platforms wisely, so you don't have to be on all of them. That's exhausting. If you have a team that can do that for you, great. But if you're just one person or, small team, you might not have the bandwidth to be doing it all of the time. So I think choosing your platforms wisely, so you don't feel like you have to do like 5 platforms all the time. And then also using the things that are built into it, like for, Facebook, Instagram, you can set up posts and things like that. So maybe you have a dedicated social media content posting and you can do it for like the whole month. Set it and forget it. I think that brings up just that whole idea again of like setting boundaries, like, because again, if you are out there, you're trying to drum up more business and get people interested in what you're doing, you want to be available, right? So you can answer questions and tell them all about your services and why they should choose you. But I don't think anyone should be answering, Facebook messages or, that kind of stuff, 9:00 at night. Like you need to kind of set time frames for yourself, because otherwise if you're just constantly on it all the time, then you're going to see all the negative things and, it's just going to become a chore. So I think thinking of it as just like, what's your dosing of social media, right? Like, okay, like, are you going to do a daily? Then it needs to be a very small amount every single day. Or are you going to do like every other day? Okay, we can have a little bit more time to allow you to respond and things like that. But just really being mindful of how much time you're spending. Most of our phones will tell us of how much time you're spending on social media. And is it going to make or break a new client if you respond in 5 minutes or 5 hours or the next day? Probably not, right? So, just being aware that it's okay to turn it off. It's actually better probably for you, especially if you are starting to be really stressed out about what you were seeing, what you were reading. I mean, like you could look at all the, animal shelters and all these dogs need homes. And that can be really draining if that's all you're seeing in your feed all day. So, recognizing how you're feeling after you're viewing all of that and then giving yourself some time to decompress and kind of recover after that, because just because it's not an active conversation or you're not seeing it in person doesn't mean that it doesn't take a toll on you.
Those are really excellent, tangible tips, because I think everybody needs to know how to balance their time and their own needs for social media. But let's use an example. Let's say you're on social media and you're just let's say you post about this podcast. Oh, I'm excited to do a podcast. And somebody was like, Valerie, we don't really need social workers. They're just stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. And they leave a nasty comment like that, which happens all the time on social media. What goes through your head, and how would you respond to that? Or would you respond?
Yeah. Well, I mean, reading that, first you have to think about what headspace are you in? Is it the end of my day and I had a couple tough client meetings and things like that? So I think, what lens am I looking and reading that in? Because I think a lot of times too, it is just words. So we're not hearing someone's inflection or how they're saying it. Or well, I don't think we really need social work. Or is it we don't need social work, right? We don't know how that person really meant it, because now it's up to my interpretation on the other end. So there's already a gap there. So I think with things like that, take time to process. And I typically wouldn't reply right away. I'm going to give time and space to let me process, because if I am reeling and really mad about it, I don't want to respond at that moment, because I'm going to say something I'm probably going to regret later. So I think it's really easy, in some of those comment sections, right, where people are just firing. And it's man, is anyone stopping to actually read and absorb, or check in with your body to see how you're feeling when you're reading all of that? Because it's so much, oh, you're wrong, I'm right, and this and that. And so I would say give some time and space to process, and then decide, is it worth replying to, right? Because a lot of times we can just delete the comment. Is that going to be easier? Is it better to reach out to that person in a private message, right? It depends on who that is. It just a random person that I have no context for why they said that? Maybe they had a bad experience with a social worker when they were a kid. Again, we have no idea. So I think you kind of have to navigate them as they come, but then just recognizing, again, it's your platform. You have the choice. You can delete, you can block. Sometimes you might have other people on your page come rally for you and say, actually, we thought this was really cool, or this is why. Because again, is it worth your energy? Because you don't have, we're talking about all the hats that you're wearing, all the, all the energy that you're expending every single day. So if you're pouring it all into your social media and having these little, comments, fights and back and forth and that kind of stuff, you're not going to have the energy to do your best for that next training session coming up. So is it worth it?
Excellent point. Yes. And that's a question that actually the answer for me is most of the time it's not worth it to respond. It really isn't. What's the benefit for you if that's taking time and energy away from doing things you're trying to do to help people and their dogs and their animals, right? So great way to wrap up there. And I also want to talk about, you're going to be doing a course for aggressivedog.com. And it's all on the topics we were just talking about, the human side of working our cases. So tell us a little bit more about that.
I am very excited about this, and I think we've come up with some really great things to talk about for this course. So we're going to be having that in September, and it's going to be a 2-part. So chapter 1 is focusing, kind of how we did today, about understanding and supporting clients, how to be a better coach, some active listening skills, talk more about the caregiver burden scoring, just a lot of things so you can show up better for your clients, which then in turn you will help that dog even better in that regard, right? So helping the human to help the pet. And then that part 2 is then all about you, because again, we're pouring in these helping professions, pouring ourselves out there, just trying to help everyone, but we need to take that step back and say, well, what about me? How can we learn a little bit more about self-care for ourselves? And what does that look like? It's not all bubble baths and trips around the world and things. Those are all great. But if you come back home or you complete that task and you feel the same way, then that wasn't actually self-care, because you should feel rejuvenated. You should feel different after you doing something. And so that's going to look different for everyone. So I think kind of taking that deep dive into self-care, what does that look like? For some days, it might be making yourself lunch, like eating, like, if you're having that super busy day, or you're having like a day where you're not working and you just feel off. Sometimes your self-care is just literally feeding yourself and drinking some water. And that is going to be gold star for that day. You did it, right? And so our standards and our criteria are going to change, just like our criteria is going to change for the dogs that we're training as well. So I'm really excited about both workshops, obviously, but just having that combination effect, because I think a lot of times we run out of time to talk about both sides. So I think just being able to have that opportunity of really dedicating a little bit more in-depth time to talk about these things through the lens of a dog trainer or, dog professionals, because again, we talked about how, still new veterinary social work is. And so there's not really a lot of resources out there for dog trainers specifically. So that's something that I am very thankful that you're allowing me to do this workshop and working with me to do this, because there's such a need for it, right? So because we can see veterinary social workers in vet clinics. They're at vet med colleges where they're able to help the vets, the clients, and the students. So you're actually training the up and coming veterinarians the skills, so self-care, the resiliency, that intentional well-being before they actually are on the front lines themselves, which is huge to try to help change that industry. Gray's growing resiliency in animal and zoo employees that I work for. We're doing that in the zoo and aquarium realm. And then now there's also vet social workers in animal shelters, but what about the dog trainer? So that's why I'm so excited to bring this to this platform, because I think it's just such a need, and really getting as deep as we can into, both sides of the human aspect as far as the clients and you as the individual, and is going to be pretty amazing.
I'm excited for it, and I highly agree with you. It's going to be such a powerful, way of helping trainers work with the cases and consultants and all the work we do. Because as you mentioned, there's just not a lot of information out there. So super excited for that. It's going to be a link for that in the show notes. So check it out if you're interested in the course and learning more about the valuable tools we can use to work with clients as well as care for ourselves. Valerie, where can people find you if they want to reach out, or if they want to check out your site or anything else you're up to these days?
Well, speaking of social media, so I am on Facebook, Instagram. I also lead the support group through Insight Animal Behavior Services. So you can go to the Insight website to learn about that free support group. That is for pet owners that have pets with behavior challenges. And I also offer low-cost one-on-one peer support sessions, and that's for anybody. So if you need someone to talk to. Again, I am not a licensed professional, so I do read a disclaimer because it really is a peer support session, but really, giving you the time and space, whether you are a vet, a trainer, a client, an animal shelter worker, that's open and available to anyone. And I will also be attending the Aggression in Dogs conference in Arizona, so come say hi in person there as well.
Wonderful. Valerie, thank you so much. This has been an excellent conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike.
That was such an enlightening conversation, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to chat with Valerie. She'll be giving a special mini course for aggressivedog.com in September of 2024 on both how to support your clients as well as support your own needs and the often difficult work we do. Stay tuned for more details on that, as I will be sending out an email to everyone subscribed to the newsletter, which you can do if you haven't already by going to aggressivedog.com. And don't forget, while you're there, you can learn more about helping dogs with aggression. From the Aggression in Dogs Master Course to webinars from world-renowned experts and even an annual conference, we have options for both pet pros and pet owners to learn more about aggression in dogs. We also have the Help for Dogs with Aggression bonus episodes that you can subscribe to. These are solo shows where I walk you through how to work with a variety of types of aggression, such as resource guarding, dog-to-dog aggression, territorial aggression, fear-based aggression, and much, much more. You can find a link to subscribe in the show notes or by hitting the subscribe button if you're listening in on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening in, and as always, stay well, my friends.